recording. All right. So I really just wanted to kind of continue building the interior, right? Let me turn the camera light stuff off just because I don't want to see those things. I like creating my own collection. That's kind of the lights and cameras. That way I can just turn the visibility off of them, but still have them available for later on. But basically, remember, we're just trying to create a simple interior in here. Not trying to put every little detail in, right? It's just kind of more to showing you how versatile this technique is, right? This extrude bridge border edge technique is great at building car bodies and spaceship bodies and all that stuff. Lets you get the edge loop flows, much like if you were actually using splines or bi-rails to build stuff. I personally have just never been that big a fan. It's slow and it takes way too much time when you've got other methods that are get you real-time feedback and are just much quicker, more robust, more flexible, but still kind of let you build, to build the forms. So it kind of has the best of what spline modeling offers you here, which is great. All right. So in this case, what I want to do is, like I said, we're just going to finish this interior, so I'll just left-click on the interior. Now remember, this interior is something I don't actually have a mirror on because of the very nature of the modeling of this, right? Because we want this to be unique here. So I'm going to hit E for, or 2 for edge mode. And I'm going to kind of connect these up here, right? So we need to kind of finish these parts up. So let's turn my tweak tool on. Remember, Q, of course, is your selection tool. In this case, you can see that I probably need a few more edge loops here anyways, so I'm just going to maybe loop cut to put one in there and there. There we go. And I'm really probably going to need some on this side too, so just left click with loop cut on, right? Alt-C is the quick key for that. Of course, you can just hit Q to go back to your selection tool, which is set to tweak currently. Remember, Q toggles through those. I do have quick key set for those, though, or mouse button set for them. And this just makes it so that I have roughly that same number of edges, right? So I can kind of grab that edge, and then I'll just kind of maybe shift left click there, and then of course we use the select link shortest path. I've got a quick key set up for that. And we see that's, 5 edges. We want this to go to 5 edges. In this case, you can actually see there's only 4 here, so I'm actually going to probably put in an extra loop cut there. And then that'll give me 5 to 5, right? And you notice when you have a quick key set up for shortest path, just super quick, easy way to get these things, right? But remember, it is in the select menu, select linked, shortest path. And it usually, if you have them in a weird place, it'll try to find the shortest path. But in this case, since they're on the same kind of row, it usually will do a good job of kind of just finding the edges between them, right? And of course, we could right click. So it brings up the edge context menu, bridge edge loops. Of course, I have a quick key set up for that already. And that just kind of creates that extra connection there. Alt-C for loop cut, so I can add myself an extra loop in here, right? And this one, of course, I could bring back as well. So W for move, and I could bring it back, maybe down a little bit. There we go. And then, of course, we could bridge these, right? So remember, you could actually bridge 2 to 2. And you notice how there's a single edge here and a single edge here. So when you do bridge, it will automatically weld those together, right? And you see how you can slowly kind of start to bring all of this form together into a nice little interior. The feet kind of go there, right? So that's kind of how all that stuff ends up going, right? Is you can slowly start to build these things up. In this case, I think we're just going to kind of maybe grab that edge, that edge, that edge, that edge. Those right there. I'll kind of do a little bit something different there. But that's 3 to 3, right? It's always better to do same number to same number. If you don't, if you didn't, it would not do the bridge at all. Blender it does, but it does the bridge all with triangles. So it's honestly a really good idea anyways, generally, to bridge same number to same number, right? 3 edges, 3 edges, 4 edges, 4 edges, right? It can be any number of edges, but it should be the same for both selection groups, right? Also, remember, these selections are different parts of the model, right? They're not touching. They're kind of different groupings. So I'll right-click, bridge edge loops. There we go. And, of course, I can do a loop cut here just to give me that extra loop in there. Now, of course, the bridge does have its own divisions control. So if you actually open up the bridge properties, it will have divisions. So you can actually, or a number of cuts to put in more edge loops. But sometimes it's just really easy to just add your own loop cut in, right? It's not like you have to use the bridge option for it. You can actually see here that there is actually probably going to be a third kind of loop here, so I'm going to do one more. So loop cut. And remember, if this is a little too high, double left click, right? Double left click selects the edge loop, particularly since we're using industry compatible. And I can grab that blue arrow, which is the z-axis, move that down. I can double left click there. Remember, these squares will move 2 at a time. So you can kind of, that red will move along this axis and this axis. You see when you click on it, it's highlighting the blue and the green axes. And then, of course, you know, we can just select, you know, kind of these 3 edges here, these 3 edges here, and then right-click, bridge edge loops, and boom, right? Kind of connects that all up there. Here, I think I actually just want to do maybe my own little extrusion here, so I'll kind of just maybe do a little mini edge loop. Control E for extrusion. There we go. Bring that out a little bit. Remember, if you want to, you can, of course, go to 2 vertices, right? So I can go to vertex mode 1, select 2 vertices, and then, of course, you can right-click, and that brings up the vertex context menu, right? And there is a merge vertices. I know we haven't seen that much, but we have seen it here and there throughout the year, right? So remember, there is a merge vertices feature in your vertex context menu. And in this case, to center will probably work best, although you could do last or first. So whatever your first one you selected, it'll merge to that. Whatever the last vertex you selected, it'll merge to that one. At center, we'll just kind of do it to their center position, right? The center of the selection. And you can just easily merge like that. And then, of course, if I wanted to, I could do some extruding and bridging up here. I think that'll probably be good enough for that, though. Not too worried about having every little bit of this done. But just trying to show you all the tools, right, and the kind of basic ideas. Double left click to select that edge loop there. Just selects the back one. And in this case, I've already got plenty of edge loops, so I think I'll just kind of move this back to kind of just rest in there. And we could probably maybe grab, say, these edges here, right? Remember, select linked shortest path. And I can just extrude. Middle mouse button just to extrude it. And then hit W for move, and you can move this out. And in this case, it's okay to kind of have that overlap, right? I'll kind of do a similar thing here where I've kind of get these edges here. And I could go further up if I wanted to, but I think we're okay. Control E for extrude. Middle mouse button. There we go. W for move. And that way we've kind of got enough in there. So we're not seeing any major gaps, right? All right. So at this point, what we'd kind of want to do is explore the idea of our chair or seats, right? Because we've kind of got enough for a floor and kind of an inner console, and you could do some more modeling to that, like extruding up to create that. But this should be fine, right? We're just kind of trying to get the major kind of forms in here. We need a steering wheel, right? I'm going to do the steering wheel first, and then we'll kind of do our chairs. Hit save. So our steering wheel should be a different object, right? Now, remember, you can create an object that's separate from these. But in this case, I think, at least for this, the chairs I'll probably do as a separate object and then kind of do it further. But I will kind of have the interior be one object, I think. So if you hit 4 to go to object mode, right, you could then go to add, right? And you could add a mesh or a curve or all these other things, right? Even images if you ever want to do reference images, right? So if you want to have an actual picture of your car in here, you can. Remember, that's kind of that first video for this series. We talked about that. So if you go back to the very first video of the car videos, I show how to use that. But in this case, I did want this to be the same object. So if you actually go to, say, like 3 for face mode, and you're actually in face, when you're in your edit modes, right? One of your edit modes, 1, 2, or 3 for vertex, edge, or face, you will see there's an add there as well. Now, you'll notice you can't add everything, right? Like curves you can't add. Those always have to be their own object until you've converted them to polygons. But polygon primitives you can add to this because it is a polygon object. And so what's cool about that is I can go in here, and you'll notice there is a torus, right? So not only can you add objects as their own objects, but you can add objects as a part of another object, just as long as you're in edit mode, right? So in this case, I'm in face mode, 3 for faces. I'm in one of the edit modes. So I can go to Add Torus. There we go. And you'll see it's right there. And of course, I could go to the options box for Add Torus, right? Remember, it's kind of down here, right? So you can open that up there. Technically, oftentimes, if you go to, like, say, trying to remember where it's at. I feel that's an edit. There's one of them here. Usually, though, I feel like you can get them up here. I just always use this one down here because I kind of want my other things there, right? But kind of right here, right? Click on that, and that'll bring up your options for this specific tool. And one of the things you'll notice is this torus is a little denser than I want it to be, right? So I'm actually going to go here, and I'm going to change this major segments to, say, like 12, right? And now you see how this is a lot simpler. I actually think I want the minor segments to be lower, too. So we'll kind of maybe do 8 for that. Right, so you see the major and minor segments kind of control the edge loops around this way, and the edge loops kind of around that way. You'll also see that you have a major and minor radius, right? So you see the major radius is the overall size of the torus, whereas the minor radius is kind of the thickness of the torus, right? So if you need an actual ring, which is what usually a steering wheel is, right, guys? Add torus, right? And you'll see that you kind of have your big things, major and minor, that kind of control the different aspects of kind of the size in one direction versus the other, edge loops in one direction versus the other. And that will work for that. In this case, we can make sure we're in face mode, and I could hit middle mouse button to move it. And then, of course, I can hit E for rotate to rotate it back here a little bit. R for scale, right? Middle mouse button does uniform scale, right? And then we can slowly kind of get this into position to be our steering wheel. Now, it does have that faceted shading, so right-click, and it brings up your face context menu. Remember, Shade Smooth is an option that's in your Object context menu and your Face context menu. Shade Smooth, and that kind of does that smooth shading. Make this a little smaller. So remember, R for scale, middle mouse button is your uniform scale. If after the fact, because you notice how that we no longer have the properties for that torus, if you want to change the thickness, believe it or not, your shrink flatten here and then middle mouse will do that also, right? Because that'll kind of use your move along normal direction, right? Particularly if shrink wraps on. So see how you can kind of go down a little bit or kind of up a little bit, right? So yeah, kind of keep that in mind a little bit that you have that available if you want to use it. Usually it's kind of good to already have it kind of at the thickness you want before you kind of try to do those adjustments, but shrink flatten can be good for that stuff. So let's go to Shade Smooth. There we go. All right. So in this case, maybe scale it down a little more. What I want to do is I kind of want to get maybe another shape in here, another cylinder, or we could actually just bridge across here, right? This is kind of one of those things where we kind of need our steering wheel structure to be there. In this case, I feel like we could probably create another cylinder. And this is actually be cool because this is going to allow me to show you some cool little tricks here. So what if you do actually have, right, your steering wheel in a different place, right? In this case, we're working with something asymmetrical or a shape that's at a non-world angle, right? Now remember, you can actually go up here to things like global, right? Right here it says global, and you can change it to normal, right? You see that kind of finds the average normal direction, which isn't always perfect, right? You could do it to cursor, you could do it to local, you can even save these if you want to, right? You can create your specific orientation that it'll save to. So there's kind of some neat stuff you could do with this. In fact, that's what I really want to show you guys, right? So in this case, the normal direction does not the best job at getting us the average normal direction for the faces, because that's what normal direction does. But one of the things you could do is if I go to, say, 2 for edge mode, and I double left click on an edge loop, and then maybe grab another edge loop in the center here. Still not quite giving me what I want. So I might try this edge loop, and maybe this one to see if it gives us better. Nope, actually I think that worked the best. There we go. So think maybe that edge loop. Yeah, there we go. So kind of see this edge loop here that's kind of right on the outside here. It's kind of basically its average normal direction is going to work pretty well for this. So sometimes you just go to, say, edge mode, or it can even be face mode, right? If I am in faces and I do a double left click and then a shift double left click to get those 2 faces there, you see it'll kind of basically do the same thing, right? The average normal direction for these is going to be pretty much perfect for what we want. And you see how normal's kind of perfectly lined up with the actual wheel? So remember, normal direction gives you that versus global, right? But remember, you can also hit on this plus, and what that does is that actually saves that, right? And uses that. So if I select the whole thing, you see how it's actually using that saved one. So believe it or not, you can actually kind of use normal, get the normal orientation you like, and then save that, right? And then if you want, you can delete it, of course, right? X will delete it, but it saves that. That way you can make a bigger selection. Isn't that cool, guys? That's cool. Having said that, one of the things we could also do is you'll notice that there's this cursor over here. I haven't talked about this much yet, really the whole year, because you don't necessarily usually need it a lot for like our little crab creature. Even our room didn't eat it that much, right? But we can use our normal direction and then save it as a face and then select more faces. But we can also actually take our cursor here, right, and go to, I'm trying to remember where it's at, Mesh, right? And you'll see in Mesh, one of the things you could do is go to the Snap section, and you could actually snap cursor to selected. And you'll notice it actually takes that cursor, not the center of the model. See, the center of the model is still here, but it takes that cursor and it lines it up with the selection here. Now, we could even go to the view for the cursor, particularly if we want the cursor itself on. See how we can click on cursor here, right? You can actually adjust it, play with it. You can select the orientation to use transform, right? So if I click here, you see how it kind of aligns to normal direction. So you can actually click on cursor. It's right below your selection tool. You could set it to transform so that it orients to the actual normal direction we have saved. But of course, there is in the mesh menu also snap cursor to selected. You see how it centers it? So what this allows us to do, and some of you guys might remember from last year when I talked about Maya, not you, Isaac, because you weren't last year, but a lot of you guys, right? It was one of those things where generally Maya couldn't really do this, right? It could orient its pivot, and that was good. But you see here that the ability to reorient your pivot's just better in Blender. It's quite good. It's up there with like Moto's ability to reorient manipulators. But also, you can actually use this cursor in ways that is really, really cool. And the fact that it can be reoriented to transform centers of selections, that's going to give us some neat things when we get to our rims, believe it or not. In fact, you're going to see one of the cool things it could do right here. So once you start understanding that you could do really cool stuff here, but you can even do stuff with your cursor, and you can click to put your cursor anywhere. And then you'll notice that you could actually set your transform orientation or even position, right? Because this one's your kind of rotation, orientation of the manipulator. The one that looks like a chain link next to it's kind of more like your position. And you notice there's a 3D cursor one there, so you can actually orient your manipulator's position and orientation to the cursor itself, right? So that's neat. But one of the things you can also do is go to add, right? Because we're in face mode still, and I can go to add, and I can add a cylinder, right? So here's the cylinder I've added. Now I'm going to go to the add cylinder options right down here. Now I want this to be a lot simpler, so we'll kind of maybe set vertices to like say, I think 12 like we had for the other one. But you'll notice I could do a line and set to world, but I can align to 3D cursor so that automatically aligns your cylinder's orientation to the cursor orientation you already have. Isn't that cool, guys? So you saw that kind of by using the cursor and telling it to use the transform that we'd saved, which is that kind of average normal direction for faces. And then when we go to add another object, we can actually tell it to use the cursor itself. We now get a nice cylinder that if I hit R for scale and I scale it down, is perfectly in the center of our torus and is already perfectly oriented. Guys, isn't that cool? And you notice how our face orientation is already set there, right? So this is one of those really, really cool things, and I can move it down a little bit because it's not exactly in the center of your steering wheel usually. But you'll notice that this manipulator orientation we've got saved, right? The cursor position that we had saved there. And that'll stay there until we don't want it there, right? So if I wanted to add another cylinder, I could do it again, right? So this is kind of a neat way, and we're going to see this a little more when we do our rim as well, to start to explore how you can actually save specific orientations, right? I had those face normals set up, and now it's just using that for whatever manipulator tool I'm on, right? It's using that initial saved orientation, which is great. But you can even use your cursor in cool ways for add objects. Shade smooth, of course. Q tool. In this case, I'm just going to maybe grab those guys. I for inset. Remember, there's inset here. Middle mouse button, and you just kind of drag, right? Kind of to have it scale in there a little bit. There we go. In this case, I think my cylinder got squashed when I was doing some scaling there, but inset those a little bit. Probably another inset. Man, why am I getting that so squashed? Let me go back. R for scale. That is weird. Let me hit inset here. We got the options for that. Let's kind of, let's see. No. There we go. In this case, the offset was just getting a little confused, so man, it's still getting squashed there a little bit. Bit weird. I think that cylinder is not exactly perfectly flat, but we can always adjust those, right? And remember, you can even go back to regular normal, right? And if you use your individual origins, each of those squares will scale differently even if you're not using inset anymore, right? So remember, individual origins makes each of these different selections independent of each other. So you can do a lot of neat stuff with that. W for move. It's usually the blue arrow is going to be your move along normal direction, right? So with normal set and that individual origins, each of those works independently of each other. I can, of course, go back to select. And you know that face is still selected, so I can go back to that original one to use that original that we had, right? So when you start to understand these better, you really appreciate how pretty amazing they actually are in Blender. They're pretty cool. You're not going to need them all the time, but you've got some cool things like individual origins, normal direction, as well as the ability to save those orientation selections you had from earlier and reuse them until you get rid of them. And that allows you to do some cool stuff. I'm going to do inset again here really quick. And this time I'll just switch to 1, right-click, because we could do merge vertices, collapse in this case, because if I use at center, actually at center is going to work for that one. Oh, but I didn't have the back one selected, that's why. Select that one, inset, there we go. Vertex, right-click, merge vertices, and if I do at center, you see how it merges them to the center? But if I use merge vertices collapse, it does it independently. So once you kind of start to understand some of these smaller little features, you realize how truly you pretty much have all the great features you want in here. And then, of course, we could just go back to our tweak tool. And I could easily do some more stuff like say, hey, I'm going to grab this face. And actually, I think I'm going to put an extra edge loop in here really quick. There we go. So I have 2. I can go to this face and then I can grab those 2 faces. Right-click, bridge. Oh, make sure we're in face mode. 3 for face. Bridge faces, there we go. And I can bridge those together, and then I can kind of find the other 2 here. Grab those 2. Right-click, bridge faces. And you see how we kind of start to get our steering wheel. And I can put some extra edge loops in there really quick. And if we need be, we can always, of course, go to 3 for face mode. Turn on circle select, right? So we can grab those guys really quick. And then you can always just right-click, extrude faces along normals. Now kind of extrude them along their normal direction. Then, of course, we could keep doing that. Move it into place a little bit more if we wanted to. And you basically kind of have the main idea of how you could build a steering wheel, how you can orient it in there. But I really wanted to be able to take advantage of showing you guys things like cursor, your ability to save this guy. In this case, you can delete it if you don't want it anymore, right? And that was kind of the big thing I want to show you today. Obviously, we're not going to be able to build a chair today because that was some new stuff, and that's actually going to prep us for our rims, believe it or not. So we'll see a bit more of that. This car is kind of good at showing us some of those features. We saw some of this stuff when we did our kind of grading in the front of the car, right? So I want you guys to remember the versatility of these options that you have available, right? And even cursor. They allow you to do some really, really cool stuff. All right, so that's a great place to stop. We went a bit longer than I normally would here today. Let me stop recording.